오늘은 월스트리트를 하고 first impression을 하겠어요. 사실 지금 이제 복직할 시기가 좀 더 다가오니까 또 다시 긴장이 되고 좀 회사 가기가 조금 무섭고 무섭다기보다는 좀 걱정이 되고 내가 다시 한번 또 이렇게 하지 않을까 이런 부분이 좀 걱정이 되고 이제 지금까지는 약간 자막이 있는 영어들 그러니까 뭐 예를 들어 지금 있는 이 아티클을 읽더라도 난 무슨 내용인지 명확히 보장받을 수가 있고 그리고 책을 읽어도 뭐 그 내용이 대충 무슨 내용인지 보장받을 수가 있고 근데 영어로라도 자막이 나왔잖아요. 그런 상황이 됐다고 하면 그냥 앞으로는 이런 게 아니라 정말로 그냥 날 것이 영어. 그러니까 한국말로 같이 대화를 할 때 그 한국어가 자막이 없잖아요. 그런 자막이 없는 상태에서의 영어를 회사에서 다시 접한다고 생각하니까 조금 무섭기는 하지만 그래도 이 시간들 동안 어쨌든 내가 영어 공부에 투자를 해서 했고 그리고 괜찮을 거다라고 좀 생각을 하면서 오늘은 좀 더 길게 읽어볼까 합니다. 자, 갈게요. 그러면 오늘은 이렇게 생겼네요. 시작해보겠습니다. Power of the first impression. What happens when CEOs and stock analysts share the first name? A study suggests that executives are more likely to share value insight with an analyst who has the same first name. The first names are so important to people, say the researchers, that CEOs are more likely to share private information with analysts with whom that they share one. For securities analysts, there might be more in a name than Shakespeare's Juliet's ever imagined. According to new research, the earnings forecasts of securities analysts who share a first name with the CEO of a covered firm matched analysts are more accurate, especially when it is an unusual name, than forecasts of analysts whose names don't match the CEO's. The study was conducted by researchers at the University of California, Berkeley, and the University of California, Los Angeles. The finding suggests that a chief executive officer is more likely to share private information with an analyst with whom that executive shares a first name, the researchers said. The conclusions are consistent with psychology research that shows that individuals have a great liking of attraction to individuals with a first name similar to their own and a greater willingness to respond favorably to requests made by such individuals, said Beth Truman, a professor of accounting at UCLA's Anderson School of Management. Dr. Truman co-wrote the paper with Ori Evanto, an assistant professor at the Hans School of Business at UC Berkeley, and Kanyuan Huang, a PhD student in accounting at UCLA Anderson. Hello, our name is. The phenomenon is considered a manifestation of implicit egotism, whereby individuals express a preference for people, places, and things that they unconsciously associate with themselves. Your first name is the most important word to you, so it really gets to heart of who you are, said Dr. Truman, based on more than 190,000 broadcasts, of which 1.4 featured a match with between the first name of the analyst and the CEO. The researchers concluded that the the accuracy of forecasts in which there was a match was on average 4.9 percentage points greater than the accuracy of the other forecasts. The findings don't mean that companies are violating the Securities and Exchange Commission's regulation fair disclosure or LEC FD, which prohibits them from selective disclosure of moving news, says Dr. Truman. LEC FD doesn't prohibit management from meeting privately with an analyst to discuss the firm's business, and such a meeting may allow an analyst to complete a mosaic of information that is material to his or her forecast, Dr. Truman says. Such a meeting may also allow the analyst to observe a CEO nonverbal communication, which permits the analyst to make additional inference about the firm progress. He says, noting that some analysts are trained to read body language. The CEO's tone and choice of words are important and can offer clues to a company's outlook, says Dr. Eventov. The positive effect of having a common first name was significantly higher among those analyst CEO matches with less common first names, says the researchers, who referred to data from the Social Security Administration to determine whether a name is common. This is perhaps because it isn't that unusual to share a common first name, they say. A John or a David might not feel more affinity towards another John or David because they probably meet a lot of people with those names. A Bruce or Henley, on the other hand, won't meet another Bruce or Henley as often, the researcher says. Other factors in play. Yuri Simonson, a professor of behavioral science at ESTADE Business School in Barcelona and co-director of the Pan-Western Credibility Lab at the University of Pennsylvania, has challenged proud studies that claim to demonstrate implicit egotism, and says the conclusions made in this new research appear to be unwarranted. Dr. Simonson says that previous studies purported to show that decisions were driven by names, when they are instead entirely driven by variables such as an age and state of birth. The names parents give their children vary over time, locations, socio-economic status, etc. For example, most men named Justin were born in the late 1980s. Dr. Simonson said, to avoid confusing correlation with causation, when we compare the outcomes of people with different names, we must take into account all of those factors. The new research on analyst forecast doesn't take any of those factors into account, he says. The researchers said their results remained intact when they recently added on control for the age of the CEOs and analysts. They can't rule out the possibility that the results are at least partly driven by other characteristics than correlated with a given name, they said, but that is the nature of empirical studies. While they don't have enough information about the analysts to control for socio-economic background, given the nature of the jobs, it is likely that the analysts and CEOs are in the upper or middle class. The researchers add. 그럼 이제 다음으로 컬쳐맵 해보겠습니다. Low context and indirect negative feedback. Combining extreme low context communication with a indirect approach to giving negative feedback, the American evaluating style called Quadrant C in Figure 2.3, page 72. C. Is so specific, unique, and often baffling to the rest of the world that it deserves a few paragraphs to itself. An explicit, low-context communication style gives Americans the reputation of lacking subtlety. Leave it to the Americans to point out the elephants in the room when the rest of us were working through our interpersonal issues nicely without calling attention to it. This means that those in quadrants A and B are often surprised to find Americans softening negative criticisms with positive messages. Before moving to France, having been raised, educated, and employed in the United States, I believe that giving 3 positives for every negative and beginning of feedback section with the words of explicit appreciation before discussing what need to be improved were universally effective techniques. If they worked well in America, then surely they should work just as well in France, Brazil, China, and well, everywhere. But after living in Europe for a while, I learned to see this style from a completely different perspective. To the French, Spanish, Russians, Dutch, and Germans, the American mode of giving feedback comes across as full and confusing. William, who we met at the beginning of the chapter and who works frequently with Americans, told me. To a Dutchman, it is all a lot of hogwash. All that positive feedback just strikes us as fake and not in the least bit motivating. I was on conference call with an American group yesterday, and the organizer began, "I am absolutely thrilled to be with you in this morning. Only an American would begin a meeting like this. Let's face it, everyone in the room knows that she is not truly, honestly thrilled. Thrilled to win the lottery, yes. Thrilled to find out that won you have won a free trip to Caribbean, yes. Thrilled to be the leader of the conference called highly thoughtful. When my American colleagues begin a communications with all of these excellence and greats, it feels so exaggerated that I feel in demeaning. We are adults here to do our jobs and to do them well. We don't need our colleagues to be the cheerleader. William's colleague Martin added, "The problem is that we can't tell when the feedback is surprised as opposed to registered to us on excellent, okay, or really poor. For a Dutchman, the word excellent is saved for a rare occasion, and okay is well neutral. But with the Americans, the great is different. Excellent is used all the time. Okay seems to mean not okay. Good is only mouth compliment. When the message was intended to be bad, you can pretty much assume that if an American is speaking and the listener is Dutch, the real meaning of message will be lost altogether. The same difference is reflected in the ways children are treated in school. My children are in the French school system during the academic year and spend the summer in American academic programs in Minneapolis area. In the United States, my 8-year-old son, Ethan, gets his homework assistant's back covered with gold stars and comments like "keep it up," "excellent work," and at worst, "almost there," another try, give it another try. But studying in Adam Durant's class requires thicker skin. After a recent Monday morning spelling test, Ethan's notebook page page was covered sorely fully in red line and fat axes, along with 7 simple words from Madame Durand. 8 errors, skills not acquired. Apply yourself. Oof, that hurts a mother from Minnesota. What about nice effort or don't give up or you'll get it next time? And I should note that Madame Durand is known as at least severe, that is the sophist of the teachers at Eden's school. At first I worried that Ethan might begin to hate school, dislike his teacher, become discouraged, or just plain stop trying. But to the surprise of his American mom, he is coming to interpret negative feedback as a friendship. The friendship. The scathing comments strike him as routine, while a rare TV, très bien, very good, leaves in a deeply positive impression on his young psyche. However, adapting to Quadrant C can be quite challenging for those from other cultures. French woman Savien Dulac recalls an experience that happened soon after her move to Chicago. Along with a group of American colleagues, I was on committee which was organizing a big conference to market our new products line to current clients. The conference was a disaster. There was a horrible icy rainstorm that morning, which means low attendance. Low attendance. The keynote speaker was so bored. The food was horrible. Afterwards, the committee met to debrief the conference. Everyone knew the conference had been a disastrous failure, but when the team leader asked for feedback, each committee member stated by mentioning something good about the conference. But the booth had been well organized, the buses to the restaurants were on time before moving on to the calamities. I was stunned. I actually had to hold my jaw closed while I watched my colleague detailed positive example after positive example in describing a situation that was so clearly anything but. When I was my turn, I couldn't take it anymore. I just lunged right in. It was one disappointment after another. I began. The keynote was uninspiring. The food was almost inedible. The breakout sessions were boring. But as I spoke, I saw the American around me staring at me, saucer-eyed and silent. Did I have food on my face? I wondered. People in the lock positions can follow a few simple strategies to work more effectively with people from quadrants C, that is, American, British, and Canadians. First, when providing evaluation, be explicit and low context with both positive and negative feedback. But don't launch into the negatives until you have also explicit stated something that you appreciated about the person or the situation. The positive comments should be honest and stated in a detailed, explicit manner. When I gave the log this suggestion, her first reaction was to feel that I was asking her to lie. If I thought the conference was a totally disastrous, isn't it dishonest to not say what I think? But I pressed her. Wasn't there anything honest and positive that she could say about the conference? The luck considered the questions and came up with a couple of ideas. After I explained the differing attitudes of Americans towards the proper way of delivering feedback, Dulac understood the kind of adjustment she needed to make. If I were in that situation again, I might start by talking about how much we learned from the events, about what to do differently next time. I might also mention how impressed I was that there were no IT snafus thanks to the logical stuff led by the always tena- tenacious and hardworking Marian. And then I get to the disaster part. I might use a downgrader. It was the bit of disaster. might go over better than the total disaster the next time around. Second, try over time to be balanced in the amount of positive and negative feedback you give. For example, if you notice something positive your colleague has done on Monday, say it there and then with explicit open appreciation. Then on Tuesday, when you need to severely criticize the same colleague's disappointing proposal before it is sent to the client, your comments will be more likely to be heard and considered rather than rejected out of hand. Third, frame your behavior in cultural terms. Talk about the cultural differences that explain your communication style. If possible, show appreciations for the other culture while laughing humbling at your own. Someone in dual position might say, in the US, you are so good at openly appreciating one another. In France, you aren't in the habits of voicing positive feedback. You might think it, but you don't say it. To those she works with frequently, Dulac might also explain her natural feedback style. When I say okay, you should hear very good. And when I said good, you should hear excellent. Framing comments like this builds awareness among people on both sides of the table and may lead to useful discussions about other cultural misunderstandings. High context and indirect negative feedback. Among, among people from culture in quadrant D, as shown on page 72, D is also Korea. D. The negative feedback is generally subtle and implicit. Turn your head too quickly and you might miss the negative message altogether. Whereas in American culture, you might give negative feedback in public by veiling it in a joking or friendly manner. In quadrant D, this would be unacceptable. Any negative feedback should be given in private, regardless of how much humor or good natural ribbing you wrap around it. Charlie Hammer, an American manager in the textile industry living and working in a Mexico City, offers these examples. I was really taken aback when one of my Mexican employees gave me his resignations. I had given him some negative feedback in a meeting, but I did it in a way that sounded to me almost like a joke. The mood in the room was light, and after giving the feedback, I quickly moved on. I felt it was no big deal, and I thought everything was fine. But apparently, it was a big deal to him. I learned later from one of my team members that I had seriously insulted him by giving this feedback in front of the team. He felt humiliated and worried that he was going to get fired. So he decided it would be better to quit first. It took me completely by surprise. As this situation suggested, the first simple strategy for giving negative feedback to someone from a culture in Quadrant D is don't give feedback on individual in front of a group. This rule applies applies even if you used a lot of soft, cozy downgraders or rely on a joke to lighten the mood. And yes, it applies to positive feedback as well. In many cultures that are less individualistic than the United States, it may be embarrassing to be singled out for positive praise in front of others. Give your individual feedback to the individual and give only group feedback to the group. A second powerful tool for giving feedback to those from Quadrant D, especially those from Asian cultures, is the technique of blurring the messages. Blurring the message. People from most Western cultures don't like the idea of making a message blurry. We like our message short, crisp, and above all, transparency. But blurriness can be highly effective in many Asian cultures if it is used skillfully and appropriated rightly, as I discovered early in my career. I had been working as a consultant for an international training firm for about a year. One of my programs was a custom designed international leadership course for the large Swiss headquarters food multinational Nestle. I called I quoted the program with Budi, an Indonesian consultant who had been a company for decades and was close to the founders. He had a reputation as a highly skilled trainer, but over the last couple of years, his classroom performance had been declining dramatically, much to everyone's chagrin. Let me also add that it was politically useful to have Booty on your side. As someone very well connected with their organizations, he could open many doors if he liked you, and he has done so for many of his favored colleagues in the past. With all of this in mind, I winced when my contacts at Nestle gave me quite clear feedback that they wanted to eliminate two of the three sessions that Budi taught in the program based on mediocre evaluation rating. I went home that evening with a knock in my stomach. When Budi heard that I was replacing his sessions with two sessions led by more junior consultants, he was likely to be hurt and embarrassed. To complicate it an already difficult situation, Budi comes from one of the most indirect culture in the world where giving negative feedback to someone older and more experienced is particularly difficult and painful. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, an anxious, anxious stubble, I set up lunch with a long-time Indonesian colleague and friends and asked her for advice. Thankfully, Aini introduced me to some strategies for blurring the message. The first strategy: give the feedback slowly over a period of time so that it gradually sinks in. In the West, Aini said, you learned that the feedback should be given right here, right now. In most Asian societies, it is best to give feedback gradually. This does not mean that you bat the direct message in periodically again and again. Rather, it means that you make small reference to the change that needs to be made gently, gradually building a clear picture as to what should be done differently. With Aini's guidance, I composed the first email to Budi, alluding to the fact that I would need to redesign the program in future months based on the feedback of the participants, and that this would have an impact on his sessions. I mentioned that I needed to focus more on topic X, which means we would have less time for topic Y. Udi responded kindly, saying that he would be pleased to discuss it with me when he was in Paris later that month. Udi and I spoke by phone the week before his visit to Paris. I mentioned that I would be sending the most recent client feedback so that he could see it before our meeting. I indicated that the program would be reworked entirely and that I would also be inviting our junior colleague to teach in some sessions. Bit by bit, Buddy was beginning to get the picture. This led to the Aini's second strategy: use food and drink to blur unpleasant message. Aini told me, if I have to provide the criticism to someone on my staff, I'm not going to call them into my office. If I do, I know that they are going to be listening to my message with all of their senses, and any message I provide will be greatly amplified in their minds. Instead, I might invite them out to lunch. Once we are relaxed, this is a good time to give feedback. We don't make reference to it in the office that the next day or next week. But feedback has been passed, and the receiver is now able to take actions without humiliations or breaking the harmony between between two parties. In Japan, Thailand, Korea, China, or Indonesia, the same strategy applies. This would be an easy rule to apply. I told Budi that when he was in Paris, I would love to have lunch with him at my favorite new restaurant near the Champs-Élysées, whether I knew he was loved the black squid pasta. Eine third and final piece of strategy baffled me at first. She urged me, say the good and leave out the bad. Was Aini suggesting that I could pass the negative message without saying it at all via telepathy? Aini explained by using an example. A while back, one of my Indonesian colleagues sent me a set of 4 documents to read and review. The last 2 documents, he 4 documents. I'll read it up. A while back, One of my Indonesian colleagues sent me a set of a set of 4 documents to read and review. The last 2 documents he must have finished in a hurry because they were very sloppy in comparison to the first 2. When he called to ask for my reactions, I told him that the first 2 papers were excellent. I focused on these documents only, outlining why they were so effective. I didn't mean to mention the sloppy documents, which would have been uncomfortable for both of us. He got the message clearly, and I didn't even need to bring up the negative aspects. Well, I understood the concept, although the executions for someone from Two Harbors, Minnesota was not easy. The next week, I met Buddy at the Italian bistro I had told him about. After 45 minutes of catching up over delicious arti- artichoke hearts and sun-dried tomato antipasti, the moments of truth had come. Say the goods, leave out the bad, I reminded myself, easing gently into the subject, my heart beating just a little faster than normal. Buddy, I began, your first session is very much appreciated. Although I am redesigning the program, I definitely do not want to touch this session. In fact, I thought I might build on your first session by working with our junior colleague on Tuesday morning sessions. Buddy replied, that sounds great, Erin. I much prefer to have shorter amounts of presentation time with a really big impact. And if that would that works for the program, it works for me. Not the moments of discomfort. I had somehow managed to pass the message without ever giving the criticism explicitly. Thank you, Annie. Here is one final warning for anyone working with people from the quantum D culture. While indirect feedback is the norm, it is quite possible to for a boss to give scathing negative feedback to an employee while remaining entirely with the realm of the appropriate. In these cases, the strongly hierarchical tendencies found in the many quadrants D cultures trump their indirect feedback patterns. Thus, it is not unheard of for a boss in Korea to berate an employee publicly or for an Indian boss to bark criticism to their staff in a way that shocks and silenced any Europeans or Americans within earshot. But you, the foreigner, should not try this. For your purposes, whether you are the mailboy, the manager, or the owner of the company, stick to blurring and leave the direct downwards first vertical feedback to them who called that country home. What does it mean to be polite? Martin, the Dutch manager we met earlier, explained to me once. In the Netherlands, we give feedback very directly, but we're always polite. I love this comment because a Dutch person's feedback can indeed be both brutally honest yet delightfully polite, but only if the recipient is Dutch. If you happen to come from one of the 195 or so societies in the world that like their negative feedback a bit less than bit less direct than in the Netherlands, you may feel that Martin's politeness is downright insulting, offensive, and yes, rude. Politeness in the eyes of the beholder. Giving feedback, especially when it's negative, is a sensitive business at the best of the time. It can be made a lot worse if the person receiving the feedback believes he or she has been spoken to rudely. Precisely what constitutes rudeness, however, varies enormously from place to place. The sophisticated global manager learns how to adapt to alter his behavior a bit to practical humility to test the waters before speaking up, to assume goodwill on the parts of others, and to invest time and energy in building good relationships. With a little luck and skill, it is possible to perceive as equally polite in Amsterdam, Jakarta, Moscow, Buenos Aires, Paris, or Two Harbors, Minnesota. 이 장은 다 읽었어요. 다음부터는 3장을 읽을 건데, 진도를 조금 빨리 빼서 3장을 더 읽고, 한 장씩 읽고서 오늘이 16일이니까, 7, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 9월 안에 이거 끝내보는 걸로.